My son got married, didn't invite me, but wanted my house in the Hamptons for his honeymoon. Welcome to another episode of Story Threads Podcast. My name is Emma, and today I'm here with Elizabeth, who came from Greenwich, Connecticut, to tell us today's unbelievable story. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Elizabeth, thank you for joining us.
Emma, thank you for having me here today. It all started when I got a phone call that changed everything. Mom, I need to tell you something, my son Daniel said on the other end of the line, his voice carrying a strangeness that made me pause in the middle of my rose garden. It was a Tuesday morning in September, and I was trimming the flowers I planted when Daniel was little. At 58, after building a successful career as an architect in Manhattan and raising my son alone after my divorce, I've learned to detect nuances in people's voices. "What's wrong, honey?" I asked, putting down my gardening shears. "Victoria and I got married yesterday. It was a small ceremony, just immediate family." The world stopped. It literally stopped. The bees ceased their buzzing, the wind in the trees fell silent, and even my heart seemed to forget how to beat. "You got married? Yesterday?" I repeated, my voice sounding strange even to myself. "Yes, it was all very quick. Victoria wanted something intimate, you know how she is about crowds. It was just her parents, her brother, and a few close friends. A few close friends. But not the mother who raised him alone. Not the woman who worked 60 hours a week to pay for her piano lessons, her college education at Yale, who was there for every recital, every graduation, every important moment in her life." "I understand," I murmured, because I didn't know what else to say. "Mom, don't be like that. Victoria was really nervous about a big ceremony. You know how she is with social anxiety." Victoria Chun. The woman my son brought home 8 months ago, introducing her as someone special he'd met at a networking event in Manhattan. At 26, she worked as a financial advisor for high-net-worth families. At least that's what she said. From the first date, something about Victoria had bothered me deeply. It wasn't maternal jealousy, as Daniel always implied when I voiced my concerns. It was something more subtle, more instinctive. The way she scrutinized my Greenwich home with calculating eyes, asking seemingly casual questions about property values and investments. How she always steered the conversation toward my summer house in the Hamptons, asking about the exact location, the size of the lot, the famous neighbors. "Daniel, did you at least tell me you were engaged?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. There was an uncomfortable pause. "It happened really fast, Mom. Victoria found this amazing place in Martha's Vineyard that had a last-minute cancellation. It was now or never. Now or never. As if marriage were a clearance sale." "Well, congratulations," I managed to say, forcing warmth into my voice. "I'm sure it was beautiful." "Thanks, Mom. And look, since we're on the subject, Victoria and I were thinking, would it be possible to use the Hamptons house for our honeymoon? We didn't have time to plan a trip, and the place is perfect for relaxing." There it was. The real reason for the call. Not to share the joy of his marriage with his mother, but to ask for access to the property he knew he would one day inherit. My house in the Hamptons wasn't just a property. It was my sanctuary, the place where Daniel learned to swim, where we spent every summer of his childhood building sandcastles and watching the sunset from the porch. It was where his father used to visit him in the early years after the divorce, before he decided that a new family in California was more interesting. "Sure, honey," I replied automatically, my upbringing prevailing over my instinct. "When were you thinking of going?" "This weekend would be perfect. Victoria has already cancelled all her appointments." 3 days' notice. For a honeymoon in the house that represented decades of family memories. As if it were an Airbnb available for immediate booking. As he went on about how amazing it would be and how Victoria was excited to get to know the family better, my mind began to process something very different. Daniel had never been impulsive. He was meticulous, a planner, careful with important decisions. The man who took 6 months to choose an apartment had now gotten married in secret with 3 days' notice. And Victoria, who claimed to have social anxiety, had managed to organize an entire wedding in Martha's Vineyard overnight. Something was fundamentally wrong with this entire situation. "Mom? Are you still there?" "Yes, honey. I'm here, I replied, looking down at my roses. Flowers that had survived storms, pests, and harsh winters because I had learned to spot signs of trouble before it was too late. I'll send the keys by express mail today. As Daniel thanked me profusely and hung up, I stood in the garden, holding the phone and feeling something I hadn't felt in years. The maternal protective instinct that all of Daniel's teenage problems had sharpened. The feeling that my son was in danger, even though he was a 29-year-old man with an MBA and a promising career. Because mothers never stop being mothers. And this mother had just realized that something very serious was going on. Something that would require more than just handing over the keys to the summer house. Because while Daniel thought his mother would simply accept being excluded from his own wedding, he had no idea that Elizabeth Morrison was not a woman to accept humiliation in silence. Especially when she detected predators circling her family. Over the next 3 days, as I organized the keys and documents for the Hamptons house, I began to mentally review all of my interactions with Victoria over the past 8 months. And the more I thought about it, the more disturbing details accumulated. Victoria Chun wasn't just an ambitious financial advisor. She was a meticulous predator. The first time I met her, Daniel had insisted that she come over for dinner in Greenwich on a Sunday night in January. Mom, you're going to love her. Victoria is incredibly smart and has a lot in common with you. When I opened the door, I was impressed. Victoria was stunning. Straight black hair down to her shoulders, flawless makeup, wearing a cashmere coat that probably cost more than my monthly salary as an architect. At 26, she carried herself with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. Ms. Morrison, finally, she exclaimed, hugging me as if we were old friends. Daniel talks so much about you. And about this wonderful house. During dinner, Victoria asked all the right questions. About my career, my most important architectural projects, my divorce, which she approached with rehearsed sensitivity. But it was the seemingly casual questions that began to bother me. Daniel told me you have a summer property. It must be wonderful to have a getaway like that. It's in Montauk, isn't it? Or Southampton. Those areas are so exclusive now. You must have bought it decades ago. The real estate market there must have appreciated so much. When I corrected her that it was in the Hamptons proper, I saw her eyes light up with an interest that had nothing to do with casual conversation. How lucky! The location must be spectacular. Daniel is so lucky to have grown up with access to something like that. The way she said lucky made me rethink every word. Over dessert, Victoria began telling us about her work. I help high-net-worth families optimize their portfolios. Often, they have significant assets, real estate mostly, but they're not maximizing their potential. Like what? Daniel asked, genuinely interested. Well, for example, a valuable summer home that's only used a few months a year represents tied-up capital. There are strategies to monetize those assets without losing them completely. I almost choked on my wine. She was appraising my property on her first visit. Victoria has a very interesting perspective on family finances, Daniel said, clearly impressed. She made me think about some things I've never considered. After they left that night, I called my sister Janet in Boston. She was basically doing a wealth assessment in disguise as dinner conversation, I explained. Liz, don't you think you're being paranoid? Daniel seems very happy. I wanted to believe that. I really did. But over the next few weeks, I began to notice subtle changes in Daniel. Our phone conversations, which had always flowed naturally, began to seem forced. He constantly mentioned Victoria thinks this or Victoria suggested that. When I asked about his work, Daniel was a sustainability consultant for large corporations. He seemed distracted. Actually, I'm rethinking things. Victoria has shown me how I may be limiting my financial potential by focusing so much on social impact projects. My son, who had deliberately chosen a career that aligned purpose with profit, was now questioning those values. In March, they showed up together for Daniel's birthday dinner. Victoria arrived with an elaborate gift, a first edition of a book on sustainable architecture that must have cost hundreds of dollars. I thought you'd appreciate it, she said, handing me the book. Daniel mentioned your interest in eco-friendly design. It was an impressive gesture, except that my interest lay more in historic restoration. Victoria had clearly confused my specialty, but no one else seemed to notice. During dinner, she dominated the conversation, telling stories about famous clients and lucrative investments. Daniel hung on her every word, as if she were a financial guru revealing universal secrets. "Did you know that Mom has a background in investing?" Victoria asked suddenly. "No, I didn't," I replied, confused. "Of course she does. Managing multiple properties requires sophisticated knowledge of the real estate market." It was a completely false statement, but she said it with such confidence that even Daniel seemed surprised he didn't know that about me. After they left, I found Victoria in the back of the house, discreetly photographing the pool area with her phone. "The view is spectacular from here," she said when she saw me. "Daniel is so lucky to have grown up in a place like this." "Victoria, were you photographing my property?" "Oh." She laughed, quickly putting her phone away. "Sorry, I'm addicted to architecture. I always photograph interesting designs for professional reference." But I had seen the screen before she put it away. They weren't photos of architecture. They were images of the garden, the pool area, the ocean view, exactly the kind of photos a real estate agent would use to appraise a property. That night, I started paying real attention. Over the next few months, Victoria implemented a subtle but systematic campaign to insert herself into every aspect of Daniel's life. She convinced him to move into a more expensive apartment in Manhattan, to better reflect his professional aspirations. She introduced him to a new social circle, where conversations revolved exclusively around money and status. Daniel, who had always been modest about his accomplishments, began posting incessantly on Instagram about expensive dinners, extravagant trips, and exclusive social events. All sponsored by Victoria. More worryingly, he began questioning my advice on everything. "Victoria thinks you have a very conservative mindset about investing," he said during a call in May. "What kind of investments, Daniel?" "Well, like you're not maximizing the potential of the Hamptons house. Victoria figured you could generate substantial income from seasonal rentals. Rent out my family home to strangers. The house where Daniel learned to ride a bike, where we celebrated every 4th of July, where we scattered the ashes of his dog Max when he died. I'm not interested in turning our home into a business," I replied. "But why not? It's a wasted source of income." The question shocked me. Daniel had never thought of the house in financial terms. It was our sanctuary, our place of memories, our family tradition. Victoria had managed to reframe even our most precious memories as missed opportunities. In June, Daniel cancelled our annual trip to the house, something we had done religiously for 15 years. "Victoria and I have decided to go to the French Hamptons this summer. She knows some people there who could be valuable contacts for my career." "The French Hamptons?" "Deauville. Victoria has clients who vacation there." Our 2-decade tradition had been replaced by social networking with wealthy strangers. That's when I began to understand that Victoria wasn't just dating my son. She was executing a long-term plan to gain access to our family property. And Daniel, blinded by a kind of sophistication he had never experienced, was being manipulated into betraying the values and relationships that had defined his entire life. Now, 3 days after the secret wedding, as I gathered the keys they had requested so urgently, I finally understood Victoria's urgency. She wasn't just after temporary access to the house. She was establishing legal rights as Daniel's wife. But Victoria Chen had fundamentally underestimated one thing. Mothers don't give up protecting their children just because they've become adults. And this mother was about to find out exactly who the woman who had stolen my son was. The following Friday, I personally delivered the keys to the Hamptons house to their apartment in Manhattan. I wanted to see Victoria operating in her environment, to observe how she treated Daniel when she thought no one was paying attention. What I witnessed made me physically sick. I arrived at the luxury building on the Upper East Side at 6:30 p.m., as planned. Daniel greeted me at the door with a quick but distant hug. His eyes looked tired, as if he hadn't been sleeping well. "Mom, thanks for doing this in person. Victoria's finishing up a work call, but she'll come out to say hello in a minute." We went up to the 23rd floor apartment. a place that easily cost $15,000 a month in rent. The windows offered a panoramic view of Central Park, and every piece of furniture seemed to have been chosen more for its price than for its comfort. Victoria appeared from the master suite wearing a white silk robe, apparently fresh out of the shower. Her hair was perfectly styled and her makeup flawless. Clearly she hadn't taken a shower at all. "Elizabeth, what a wonderful surprise," she said, embracing me with an exaggerated display of affection. "Daniel didn't tell me you were coming in person. You shouldn't have bothered." But as she hugged me, she whispered in my ear, "Especially considering that I'm the one taking care of Daniel now." It was such a possessive and calculated statement that my blood ran cold. She had staked her claim on my own son, using a tone that made it clear I was considered an intruder. "Well, I wanted to give you the keys and wish you a safe trip," I replied, keeping my voice controlled. Daniel was organizing some folders on the dining room table, apparently preparing work to take with him on the trip. Victoria walked over to him and, in a gesture that seemed affectionate but was clearly domineering, closed all the folders. "Honey, you promised this would be a real honeymoon. No work." "Victoria, I just need to review these contracts before Monday. 15 minutes, tops." "Daniel." Her voice grew firmer, almost authoritative. "We've talked about this. You need to learn to prioritize our relationship over work. That's what successful people do." I watched my son, a 29-year-old man with an MBA and an established career, hang his head like a child being scolded. "You're right. I'm sorry." Victoria smiled triumphantly and turned to me. "Men need direction in relationships, don't they, Elizabeth? I'm sure you understand." The implication was clear. I had failed to properly direct my ex-husband, which is why our marriage had ended. It was a personal attack disguised as casual conversation. "Daniel has always been very independent," I replied. "He never needed direction." "Oh, but we all need guidance at some point," Victoria replied, sliding her hand possessively onto Daniel's arm. "Especially when we're stuck in old patterns that limit our potential." Old patterns. As if the values I had taught my son were obsolete and harmful. For the next 20 minutes, I watched Victoria systematically deconstruct every one of Daniel's preferences. When he mentioned that he was looking forward to walking on the beach, she suggested they focus on more sophisticated activities. When he mentioned that he was looking forward to walking on the beach, she suggested they focus on more sophisticated activities. When he said he planned to cook for her, Victoria laughed and said, "Real men make reservations at fancy restaurants." Each comment was seemingly lighthearted, but loaded with psychological manipulation. She was reprogramming his personality, one observation at a time. The most disturbing moment came when Daniel offered her coffee. "Mom, would you like some coffee? I can make you the one you like, with cinnamon." It had been our tradition since he was a teenager. Daniel always made coffee with cinnamon when I visited him. "How sweet, Daniel still makes coffee for Mommy," Victoria said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "But honey, we talked about this. It's important to set healthy boundaries in adult relationships." Daniel blushed, clearly embarrassed. "Victoria, it's just coffee." "Sure, but it's the pattern, honey. Independent adults don't need to recreate childhood rituals to connect." She had turned a simple gesture of affection into something pathological. Daniel cancelled the coffee, mumbling an excuse about not being sure if there was cinnamon. I knew there was cinnamon. I had bought him a jar myself the month before. When I left that apartment, I understood that Victoria wasn't just isolating Daniel from me. She was systematically erasing our shared history, replacing our family traditions with her version of adult sophistication. In the taxi back to Greenwich, I made a phone call that would change everything. "Janet, I need your help. Do you remember that private investigator who helped with your friend Susan's divorce?" My sister was silent for a moment. "Liz, what's going on?" "I need to know exactly who Victoria Chan is. Everything about her. Financial history, previous relationships, educational background. Everything. Do you think she's hiding something?" "I don't think. I know." Marcus Riley was a retired NYPD detective who now worked as a private consultant. His reputation was impeccable, and his methods meticulous. We met the following Monday at an inconspicuous cafe in Stamford. "Ms. Morrison, your sister explained the situation to me. You suspect that your son's wife is not who she says she is." "I suspect she is exactly who she says she is. A financial predator. I just need proof." Marcus opened a notebook and began taking notes. Full name of the person in question: Victoria Chen, 26, financial advisor. Claims to work with high net worth families. Do you have her social security number? I smiled for the first time in days. It's on the marriage certificate Daniel showed me yesterday. During our conversation, Daniel had proudly mentioned that Victoria had helped him optimize his tax return, including some strategic adjustments to his deductions. "She really understands the system," Daniel had said. "She managed to reduce my tax burden by almost 30%. At the time, that sounded like financial efficiency. Now, it sounded like possible tax fraud." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "I'll start with a basic background check. Employment history, financial records, possible lawsuits. I should have preliminary results in 48 hours. And if you find anything suspicious? Then we expand the investigation. Social media, social circle, relationship history. If Victoria Chan has secrets, we'll find them." That night, while waiting for Daniel and Victoria to return from the Hamptons, I mentally organized everything I knew about her. The seemingly inconsistent details I had chosen to ignore over the past few months. How she always avoided talking about her family, changing the subject every time I asked about her parents. How she never received work calls when she was in our presence, despite claiming to have demanding clients. How her apartment was always immaculately tidy, but there was never any evidence of housework. No dishes in the sink, no mail, nothing to suggest that anyone actually lived there. How she owned clearly expensive clothes and accessories but never mentioned big sales or bonuses that would justify that standard of living. And most importantly, how she had become an expert on Daniel's life before she even knew him well. Victoria knew about the Hamptons house on her first visit. She knew the details of my parents' divorce before Daniel shared that information. She even knew about my professional preferences and investments in a way that seemed impossible for someone who had just come into our lives. Marcus called on Wednesday morning. "Ms. Morrison, I need to meet with you today. Preferably somewhere private." The tone of his voice made my stomach clench. "You found something." "I found several things. And none of them are good." We spent the meeting at my house in Greenwich, with Marcus spreading documents across the dining room table like evidence in a trial. "Victoria Chun does exist, but not in the way she presented herself to your family." Marcus opened the first folder. "She does work as a financial advisor, but not for legitimate high-net-worth families. She works for a Hong Kong-based group that specializes in identifying and exploiting vulnerable American targets." My blood ran cold. What kind of targets? Young heirs, recent widows, people with significant assets but little experience in financial management. The pattern is always the same: establish an intimate relationship, gain access to financial information, and then drain the assets through fraudulent investments. Marcus turned the page, revealing a series of photographs. Victoria Chun isn't her real name. It's Victoria Liu, and she has a history of at least 4 similar relationships in the last 5 years. The photographs showed Victoria with different men, always at elegant social events, always smiling that same calculated smile I had observed with Daniel. Each of these men lost significant sums of money before discovering who she really was. Marcus pointed to a specific photo. "This is James Patterson, heir to a shipping fortune. He lost $2.8 million before his family intervened. And this is Michael Torres, whose trust fund was completely drained before he realized Victoria had forged his signature on several documents." I felt as if the world was crumbling around me. And Daniel? What is her plan for Daniel? Marcus closed the folder and looked me in the eyes. "Ms. Morrison, I believe the sudden marriage was precipitated by something specific. Victoria discovered something about Daniel's potential inheritance that caused her to accelerate her plans." "What inheritance?" His property in the Hamptons is worth approximately $4.2 million on the current market. And according to public records, Daniel is the sole beneficiary in his will. The realization hit me like a punch in the stomach. Victoria hadn't married Daniel for love. She had married him for my summer house. And now, as his legal wife, she had a claim to any inheritance he received. Marcus, how long do we have before she can legally access Daniel's assets? It depends on how she proceeds. If she can convince him to transfer property into both of their names, or if something happens to you. He didn't need to finish the sentence. Victoria Chan, or Lou, wasn't just an emotional manipulator. She was a professional financial predator. And my son was her next victim. But now I knew who she really was. And women who build fortunes through manipulation have one fundamental weakness: they depend on their victims remaining ignorant. It was time to change that. Victoria had fundamentally underestimated one thing: a mother protecting her son is a far more dangerous force than any professional predator. And that mother was about to show exactly what she was capable of. With the evidence against Marcus Riley spread out on my desk, I began to devise something Victoria Liu would never expect: a trap using her own methodology against her. Over the next few days, I studied every detail of her background as if it were an operations manual. Victoria followed predictable patterns, and now I knew every move in her strategy. First, I called Patricia Winters, a financial crimes attorney I had met years ago during my divorce. "Elizabeth, it's good to hear from you. How can I help?" "Patricia, I need advice on a case of marital fraud. Someone married my son specifically to access family assets." There was a pause. "That's very serious. Do you have evidence?" "I have her complete history with other men, suspicious financial documents, and access to recorded conversations. I want to see everything. If it's what I suspect, we could be dealing with criminal conspiracy." While arranging the meeting with Patricia, Victoria called personally. "Elizabeth, how are you? Daniel and I are having a wonderful honeymoon at your house." Her voice carried a new confidence, almost arrogant. She had managed to marry Daniel and now had legal access to his assets. "That's wonderful to hear, dear. Are you enjoying yourselves?" "Oh, more than we could have imagined. Daniel is already talking about spending more time here. In fact, we were thinking, would it be possible to transfer the property into both of our names? For inheritance and tax purposes." There it was. Less than a week married, and Victoria was already trying to take legal possession of my house. "That's an interesting conversation, Victoria. Let's talk about it when you get back." "Perfect. Daniel will be so happy. He was worried about how you'd react, but I told him you'd understand that we're a family now." After I hung up, Marcus called with devastating updates. "Ms. Morrison, I found something critical. Victoria Liu has an accomplice, a lawyer in Manhattan named Richard Kwan. He specializes in quick property transfers through fraudulent powers of attorney." "How does it work?" "Victoria convinces her victims to sign documents that look routine, but are actually broad powers of attorney. Kwan then uses those documents to transfer property without the victim's knowledge." My blood ran cold. What about the other men? James Patterson, Michael Torres. They all lost properties this way. Patterson lost a $3 million house in Nantucket. Torres lost a penthouse on the Upper East Side. How long does the process take? Once she has the signatures, between 48 and 72 hours. I did a quick calculation. Victoria and Daniel had been at the Hamptons house for 3 days. If she followed the pattern, she would try to get his signatures today or tomorrow. I called Daniel immediately. "Mom, what a surprise. We were just talking about you." "That's great. How's the honeymoon?" "Amazing. Victoria has some fantastic ideas about the property. She said you might be interested in optimizing some legal aspects." "Daniel, listen to me carefully. Do not sign any documents Victoria presents to you. None." "Why? Mom, what's going on?" "I can't explain over the phone. Trust me. If she brings you any papers to sign, Tell her you need to review them with your lawyer first. You're being paranoid again. Victoria just wants to help with estate planning. In the background, I heard Victoria calling Daniel. Honey, who is that? It's my mom, Daniel replied, moving the phone away from his ear. Oh, how sweet. Tell her we're having a wonderful time and that I'm looking forward to our conversation about the property. When Daniel returned to the phone, his voice had changed. Mom, Victoria thinks you're being resistant to changes that would be beneficial to the entire family. Daniel, please. Just don't sign anything until we talk in person. All right, but you need to stop seeing conspiracy in everything. That night, Patricia Winters reviewed all of Marcus's documents. Elizabeth, this is a federal case. Victoria Liu is operating a multi-state marriage fraud scheme. We need to involve the FBI. How much time do we have? If she follows the pattern, she'll try to get Daniel's signatures tomorrow. Once she has the documents, she'll disappear. I spent the entire night organizing the coordinated action. Patricia contacted Special Agent Jennifer Chun, ironic surname, of the FBI, who had been monitoring marriage fraud activities. Ms. Morrison, we can intercept her communications and document fraud attempts in real time. But we need your son to cooperate willingly. He doesn't believe Victoria is a criminal. Then we'll have to force the issue. Can you convince him to return home tomorrow? I called Daniel at 7 a.m. Mom, why are you calling so early? Daniel, I need you to come back today. There's been an emergency with the house paperwork. What kind of emergency? Insurance and tax issues that require your immediate signature. If we don't resolve this today, I could lose the property. It was a lie, but it worked. Daniel was terrified of complicated bureaucratic issues. Let's leave in an hour. At 2 p.m., Daniel and Victoria arrived in Greenwich. Victoria seemed annoyed that their honeymoon had been cut short, but she kept up her helpful wife act. Elizabeth, Daniel said there are problems with the property. How can I help? Actually, Victoria, I need to talk to Daniel first. Family legal matters. Of course, but as his wife, I have a legal right to participate in estate discussions. There was her first statement of legal rights regarding family property. I took Daniel to my office while Victoria waited in the living room. In the office, Patricia, Agent Chen, and Marcus were waiting. Daniel, sit down. You need to hear something that will change your life. When Daniel saw the investigators, his face went pale. Mom, what is this? Daniel, Agent Chen began, your wife Victoria Liu is a criminal wanted for marriage fraud in 4 states. We showed him the photographs, the documents, the complete history. Daniel was completely silent for 15 minutes, processing that he had married a professional predator. She loves me, he finally muttered. Daniel, Patricia said gently, she married you 3 days after we discovered her activities. The timing is no coincidence. What do you want me to do? Help us catch her in the act. When she tries to get your signature on the fraudulent documents, you'll be wearing a microphone. Daniel looked at me with broken eyes. Mom, how did you know? Maternal instinct, dear. And the fact that predators always make the same mistakes. In the next room, Victoria waited, probably wondering how she would convince Daniel to sign the papers Richard Kwan had prepared. She didn't know she was about to walk straight into a federal trap. As we attached the recording equipment to Daniel, I looked out the window at my rose garden. The same flowers I had been tending when I received the call about the secret wedding. Victoria Liu had chosen the wrong family to manipulate. And in a few minutes, she would find out exactly what that choice would cost her. Daniel returned to the room with Victoria carrying an invisible microphone and the weight of a devastating truth. I watched them through the half-open door of my office, where Agent Chun monitored every word through headphones. Darling, finally. Did your mother resolve the document issue? Victoria asked, her voice carrying a barely concealed anxiety. Yes, but there have been some complications, Daniel replied, following the script we had rehearsed exactly. My mother needs me to sign some papers to transfer legal responsibility for the property. Victoria perked up instantly. What kind of papers? Power of attorney and property transfer documents. She said that for tax purposes it would be better if the house was in my name before the end of the year. It was a lie, of course, but Victoria took the bait like a hungry predator. Oh, Daniel, that's fantastic. In fact, I brought some documents that my lawyer prepared specifically for this situation. My blood ran cold. She had brought the fraudulent papers with her on their honeymoon. Victoria opened her Louis Vuitton bag and took out a leather folder. Richard Kwan, my estate planning attorney, prepared these documents. They optimize the transfer and minimize taxes. What kind of optimization? Daniel asked, keeping his voice neutral. Well, since we're married now, if the property is in both our names, we have significant tax advantages. And if anything happens to you or your mother, I can protect the family fortune. There it was. Victoria openly revealing her intention to access the property through fraudulent marriage. That makes sense, Daniel said. Can I see the documents? Victoria spread 3 sets of papers on the coffee table. This is the broad power of attorney, this transfers the property into our joint names, and this establishes survivorship rights. Daniel picked up the first document and pretended to read it carefully. Victoria, some of these clauses seem very broad. This one says you can make financial decisions about all my assets. It's standard, honey. Couples need to have mutual access for legal protection. And this clause about survivorship rights? It means that if something happens to you, I keep the property instead of it reverting to your mother. It's protection for our nuclear family. Daniel looked at her with an expression I didn't recognize. Our nuclear family that's been in existence for a week? Victoria laughed nervously. Daniel, don't be dramatic. We're planning a life together. We are? Because according to these documents, you're planning to take complete control of my assets. Victoria's mask began to slip. Honey, you're misunderstanding. It's mutual protection. Protection from what, Victoria? Or should I say Victoria Lou? The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria went pale, her eyes darting between Daniel and the documents on the table. I don't know what you're talking about. We know about James Patterson, about Michael Torres, about your marriage fraud operation with Richard Kwan. Victoria stood up abruptly, her expression changing completely. The sweet smile and feminine vulnerability were gone, replaced by something cold and calculating. You can't prove anything. Actually, we can. That's when I entered the room, followed by Agent Chen, Patricia Winters, and Marcus Riley. Victoria instinctively backed away, her eyes searching for escape routes. Victoria Liu, Agent Chen announced, flashing her badge, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit marriage fraud, document forgery, and money laundering. This is ridiculous. I haven't done anything illegal. Marcus Riley opened his evidence folder. We have bank records showing transfers between you and Richard Kwan related to fraudulently obtained properties. We have statements from your previous victims. And now we have a recording of you admitting your fraudulent intentions. Victoria looked at Daniel with a fury that finally revealed her true nature. You recorded me? Yes. And every word will be used against you in court. Daniel, she tried one last manipulation, her voice returning to its soft, vulnerable tone. You love me. We can get through this. Your mother is just jealous of our happiness. Daniel looked at her with an expression of deep disgust. Victoria, I don't even know who you really are. Our entire honeymoon was about you trying to steal my family's property. I love you, she shouted, completely losing her composure. You love my inheritance, Daniel replied coldly. Agent Chen approached with handcuffs. Victoria Liu, you have the right to remain silent. As they read her rights, Victoria turned to me with eyes full of hatred. You ruined everything. He'll never trust anyone again because of you. I saved my son from a criminal, I replied calmly. And probably saved other future women as well. As the agents led Victoria away, Daniel sat down heavily on the couch, his head in his hands. Mom, how did you know? I sat down next to him and put my arm around his shoulders. Maternal instinct, dear. And the fact that people like Victoria always make the same mistakes. What mistakes? They underestimate a mother's love for her child. Patricia approached with legal updates. Elizabeth, Victoria's arrest will trigger a full federal investigation. Richard Kwan is already under investigation and will likely find other victims. What about the marriage? Automatically annulled due to fraud. Daniel, legally, it's as if it never happened. Daniel looked at me with tears in his eyes. Mom, I'm sorry. For everything. For not trusting you, for excluding you from the wedding, for almost losing our home. You don't have to apologize for being deceived by a professional, Daniel. You just have to learn to trust your instincts. As the investigators finished gathering evidence, I watched my son process everything that had happened. Victoria had temporarily broken our connection, but in the end, she only strengthened it. 3 hours later, when everyone had left, Daniel and I were alone in my kitchen, drinking cinnamon coffee. Mom, what happens now? I smiled, thinking of the predator who had fundamentally underestimated what it means to interfere with a family. Now, honey, Victoria Liu is going to spend the next few years in prison, thinking about the consequences of trying to steal from a mother. But the story wasn't over yet. Because when you dismantle a professional criminal operation, the revelations keep coming for weeks. And the next discoveries about Victoria's empire would be even more shocking. 6 months after the trial, I received an unexpected call from Agent Chen. Elizabeth, I thought you'd like to know, Victoria Liu was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Richard Kwan received 12 years. And we were able to locate 7 more victims through the investigation. 7 victims. Men of various ages, all with significant family wealth. Together, they lost over $20 million. Your courage in exposing Victoria saved dozens of future victims. Daniel, who was having coffee with me in the kitchen, our tradition restored, looked up from the newspaper. Mom, you literally dismantled an international criminal organization. I smiled, thinking of the irony. Victoria had underestimated me as just an overprotective mother. But mothers who protect their children are forces of nature when necessary. 2 months later, Daniel showed up with a surprise. Mom, I want to have a family renewal ceremony at the Hamptons house. Invite everyone who really matters and celebrate what we almost lost. Daniel, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Victoria almost destroyed our connection, our family tradition, our mutual trust. I want to make it official that nothing and no one will ever come between us again. At the end of September, we organized a small celebration on the beach. Daniel invited his true friends. Janet came from Boston, Marcus Riley showed up with his wife, even Patricia Winters joined us. As we watched the sunset from the porch, the same porch Victoria had secretly photographed months earlier, Daniel turned to me. Mom, how did you know from the very beginning? A mother's instinct is real, Daniel. But more importantly, I've learned that authentic people don't try to isolate you from those you love. They integrate into your life, they don't replace it. Today, Daniel is dating Sarah, a literature teacher who loves our family traditions and contributes her own stories. She makes cinnamon coffee better than either of us. The Hamptons house remains in my name, but now it has new meaning. It's where I learned that protecting family isn't paranoia, it's love in action. Victoria probably thought she was manipulating a naive family. What she didn't count on was that real families have strengths that predators never understand: unconditional loyalty, mutual protection, and the relentless determination of a mother protecting her child. Some people learn early on that underestimating family love is the most expensive mistake they can make. Victoria Liu found that out the hard way.
What an incredible story, Elizabeth. I'm glad everything worked out and that your family came out of this experience even stronger. Thank you for sharing this powerful story with us. What about you, listener? Did you like the story? Leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories of people who refuse to be victims. See you next time.